So marketing ROI, everyone does it. So, so let's start with how ROI is typically calculated. These come from the Facebook, HubSpot, and Salesforce websites. And these should be fairly recognizable to most people. So Facebook says that it's your revenue minus your marketing cost divided by your marketing cost. And then ROAS is sales revenue divided by ad spend. HubSpot was essentially the same, revenue minus marketing cost. Salesforce, because they're a sales-oriented company and they acknowledge that there's actually such things as sales teams, they have a little bit broader definition where they simply call it marketing value, although they never actually define what marketing value is. But they assure you that that's the number you should be using. And so there are some fundamental problems with these. So why is this wrong? So first and foremost, revenue is the wrong metric because businesses run on gross margins. They don't run on revenue. And as a result, it's misaligning marketing spend with with uh, with the revenue recognition events in the sense that, and there's two misalignments here. One misalignment is with the fact that only a small portion of that revenue actually gets recognized as value to the business because the revenue doesn't come for free. Um, you actually have to have made and sold something in order to get that revenue. And there's some cost in delivering the product, and there's definitely cost in acquiring the customer. Um, uh, the other thing is that it fails to capture the long duration impact of brand marketing. And we've seen this over the last 20 years, especially in B2B digital marketing, where you've seen this almost complete abandonment of brand marketing in favor of the more easy to measure short-term performance marketing. Um, uh, Maybe the bigger, more subtle issue is the fact that it can't be used to determine if our marketing is effective. That it really is a measure of how efficiently you're spending the budget, but it's not a measure of whether or not that budget spend is actually producing effective results for the business. Um, so so marketing ROI is essentially an efficiency metric, which means that it's got a much narrower scope than how people tend to try to use it. And again, the distinction here is efficiency is doing things right. So how well were the resources used relative to the outputs versus effectiveness is doing the right things. So the degree to which the things you're doing are achieving business objectives. Um, so I want to start with a little bit of a discussion on how even when you can calculate an ROI number, it can be misleading. Um, and this is the other problem with ROI is that it's often used to try to represent the value that marketing is bringing to the business, which is an effectiveness measure. And it's really, at best, an efficiency metric and often not even a very good metric for that. Um, so one of the examples I always use is this idea of what's the ROI of a factory building. Nobody calculates the ROI of a factory building. Um, uh, so why are factories housed in buildings to start with? The buildings cost money up front to build, and they keep costing you forever through maintenance cost. So why aren't all factories just built out in the open in the middle of a field? Because their ROI is negative. No matter how you calculate it, it's a negative value. And the answer is that the factory building is bringing value to the business through mechanisms other than generating revenue or directly generating revenue. Um, that factory building has value to the business and is worth investing in because it takes the contents of the building, the machine tools and the workers that are running the factory, and it makes them both more efficient and more effective. So the machine tools last longer because they're not out in the weather. They're not down as often for maintenance. So these reduce cost and increase output. The workforce is more productive. The factory doesn't have to shut down every time it rains. So these are all ways that the building that houses the factory is bringing value to the business, and why businesses are more than happy to pay money to build a building, even though it has negative ROI. And so ROI is not always is not always an ideal measurement for certain types of activities and assets. And I think marketing is one of these. So in many ways, marketing is a lot more like the factory building. Sales is more like the factory. So marketing delivers value by being this nonlinear amplifier of other linear functions of the business. So if marketing didn't exist, several things would happen. One, the sales team would have to spend a significant fraction of their time basically doing cold prospecting to find leads, rather than spending all of their time focused on being able to take leads that are likely to buy and focus on trying to close those to revenue. So because of what marketing does, sales is going to close deals faster at a higher close rate and at a lower sales cost, um, than what would be happening if marketing didn't exist. And I've seen this often in companies where you'll have an early stage startup and they will basically not do any marketing for the first 2, maybe 3 years, and they focus entirely on being sales driven. So they'll hire that sales team, and what you see that sales team doing is often spending at least half of their time just trying to prospect, looking for someone who's likely to buy. Then they have to basically explain a company that no one's ever heard about before. And and the entire sales process tends to be very, very inefficient and very costly without marketing being there to lay the groundwork ahead of time in terms of awareness about the product and the company, the ability to build trust in the product and the brand, and the ability to be able to identify and capture those leads so that sales can do the thing that really brings value from a sales standpoint, which is closing deals. So where are kind of best and worst cases for marketing ROI? And if you go back to the early prehistory, the earliest use of marketing ROI tended to come out of what used to be called direct response marketing. So these were companies, this is pre-internet, so 30, 40, 50 years ago. There were companies that sold products by putting ads in the backs of magazines, and you would either mail something in or you would call an 800 number and uh, and be able to then buy the product either through mailing something in or through calling a phone number. And in those cases, there's no sales team. There's sort of no brand marketing typically. Everything that you're doing with marketing is directly, immediately resulting in a sale. And so a lot of that kind of old school direct response marketing looks a lot like digital marketing that is focused exclusively on performance marketing. Exclusively on things like paid search would be an example of something that would be equivalent to that. So this still works quite well if you're doing something very narrow like pure online direct to consumer marketing. That kind of that traditional, whatever we spent this month on marketing applies to the revenue that came in, because the lag time between when we made the marketing expenditure and when the revenue hit, it tends to be a very, very short time window. Where it does not work well is for most of B2B. And part of the problem here is that we tend to have very long time lags and long purchase cycles. So, on certainly something like enterprise, B2B enterprise SaaS, the average purchase cycle is 5+ years between coming back in market to buy again. For many, especially for larger companies, it can often be a decade or more. So once you've got that, say, CRM system installed, you're going to go years before you're going to ever come back into the market to look at potentially replacing it. And the other problem here is that a lot of these B2B products have very long sales cycles. So not only is it a very long period between purchases, but once they are ready to purchase, the sales cycle happens over a very extended period of time. And uh, and then the other part is the very heavy involvement and cost of the sales team in closing the deal. Um, it's not atypical for the budget for the sales organization to be significantly larger than the budget for the marketing organization in B2B companies, uh, because a lot of resources have to be poured into closing those deals. And uh, and we need to be able to somehow account for all of this if we want to do an ROI measurement. So the first step here is, if you think about ROI, it's two parts: return and investment. So return on investment. So the first step here is we need a better version of return. Um, so the first thing to know is that the return in ROI is not revenue. Revenue does not come for free. Every dollar of revenue costs that business something to collect. And the business only gets to keep just the portion of that revenue that's left over after paying the cost associated with making, selling, and delivering the product. And even for something like a SaaS product, that cost of just delivering and provisioning one more unit of that product is far from zero. I mean, typically that number is in the 20 to 25% range, because you've got all of the onboarding, the provisioning. It's usually relatively labor intensive. There's the initial support to get them up, to get the customer up and going. That's all a part of delivering the product. That you would not have paid those dollars out, if you had not sold that one extra unit to one extra customer. And and then there's all of the costs associated with running the business in general, beyond just delivering and selling the product. So let's give an example of why a revenue ROI is a really, really bad idea. So let's say we've got two campaigns and you're reporting your campaign ROIs out, and this is using kind of the traditional Meta HubSpot kind of definition. So all we know is that one campaign generated 250,000 in revenue, one 400,000. Each campaign cost 100,000. So we have 150% ROI and a 400% ROI. So which campaign was best for the business? So if this is all you know, then you would say campaign B generated 150,000 more in revenue and has, almost 3 times higher marketing ROI. It looks like a no-brainer. But reality is you have no idea. This information tells you nothing about which of these campaigns was best for the business. And the reason why is, let's look at what the campaigns are doing. So campaign A is, the campaign is for the widget store. Campaign A is we have better widgets. Campaign B is 50% off sale. So if we come back and recalculate this, but based on gross margin, and we'll talk about exactly what gross margin is in a minute, but as a rough estimate, gross margin is the amount of money that the company keeps out of the revenue for the next incremental sale. So if the underlying product has a 50% gross margin, then that 250,000 allows the company to book 125,000 in profits. The 400,000, if we sell it at half price, we're going to cut our margin in half. And so now that 400,000, the business only keeps 100,000. So you're actually selling a lot more stuff and putting less money in the bank. And when we recalculate based on a margin-based ROI instead of a revenue-based ROI, suddenly campaign A has a 25% ROI and campaign B is a complete wash, 0 return on investment. So not only is this massively wrong, but the final answer of which of the two campaigns is better completely reverses once you start looking at how many dollars the business actually gets to keep from the sale versus just looking at the revenue. So this is why you cannot use revenue as the baseline for an ROI calculation.